What is up, football fans, and welcome back to another episode of the NFL Whip Around. I am Jeff Hartman, joined by Coach KT Smith. Before we get into the show, if you're watching on YouTube, give us a like, subscribe to the channel. We do appreciate it. It does help support Fans First Sports Network. And if you're listening to this in the audio form on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, give us a 5-star rating. Apple Podcasts, give us a good comment. It all does help in the algorithm, boosting us up there so that we reach more earbuds, I guess, if that's what you're talking about in the audio side. But with that all out of the way, Coach, how's it going?
It's going great. Happy Memorial Day to everybody out there. Even though in my part of the woods here, it's a washout, but it's nice to turn the page and get headed towards summer here.
The unofficial start of summer it's always fun. It's always exciting. I remember as a kid, we used to get off school around this time. When I was a teacher for 16 years, sometimes the end of the school year wasn't until the middle of June. And it just felt like my summer was getting cheapened and shortened.
Well, as a current teacher, I can tell you that we are out on June 13th. And the next 2 weeks, vigor and relevance will be a little bit down over the next 2 weeks.
You'll be doing a different R&R, not rigor.
Exactly.
All right, let's get this show off on the right foot. We're talking about your favorite position group, wide receivers. You love wide receivers,
Let's
Coach.
go. Love them.
And it just seems like every offseason, every stretch of the NFL season, someone is posturing to be considered the highest paid player. I feel like this started back even when Julio Jones, Antonio Brown were having their crazy tear in the NFL as the top receivers. Suddenly it felt like someone wanted to be called the highest paid receiver at their position. Now, A.J. Brown is that guy right now for the Philadelphia Eagles when he got his deal right before the NFL draft started on Thursday. And everyone is kind of reading the lay of the land and seeing that two players, Justin Jefferson of the Vikings and CeeDee Lamb of the Cowboys, who both opted out of OTAs last week, they're looking for new contracts to get them to be that next guy. The question is, who deserves the bigger payday, Lamb or Jefferson? What do you think, Coach?
It's going to be really interesting because I think the two of them are probably going to engage in a little bit of a game of chicken here to see which one signs first. Because whoever signs first, the other will want to top that, even if it's by a minimal amount. I think arguably Jefferson's the guy who deserves more simply because of the body of work. 4 years into the league, I mean, this guy's averaging almost 100 yards of receptions or 100 receiving yards per game for his career. That's mind-boggling. 98.3 yards receiving per game for his entire career. But CeeDee Lamb's coming off a heck of a 2-year run, 107 catches in 2022, and then he led the NFL with 135 catches last year. So his overall production's not as great, but his arc is certainly pointing him in an impressive direction. I mean, you could really argue for either one if you wanted to. I just feel like Jefferson stepped on the field from day one as a rookie and was a dominant receiver and remains as such. Lamb is a guy who didn't start as fast, but he has gotten better and better as he's gone. If you're an agent and you're coming to the bargaining table with an argument for one or the other, I guess Jefferson's weighs a little bit more, but it's pretty close.
Well, let me ask you, before I give my answer, let me ask you a couple questions here about these two players and their situations. So look at their careers in the National Football League so far. Not so much right now. We'll get to that. Who do you think has been in a better situation to succeed? Jefferson with Kirk Cousins at the time in Minnesota, or Lamb in Dallas with Dak Prescott?
Well, they've both had, pretty good quarterbacks in that regard, right? And well, I mean, Lamb has had some probably a better supporting cast at wide receiver in Dallas, and so they've been able to spread the catches out a little bit more. Whereas Jefferson was kind of like the guy from day one. He hasn't had a running mate, so to speak, at the receiver position there until last year when he had Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson. And so now they've got a fully developed receiving core. So you may see his catches decrease a little bit. And maybe the opposite is now true in Dallas with them losing a couple of their receivers, some guys getting older there. And you may see Lamb's increase. And so I think the situations are fairly similar, but they're maybe moving in opposite directions right now.
Well, that was my next question was, well, who do you think is in the better situation moving forward? I have to look at Justin Jefferson, and he's looking at a quarterback that is a rookie who's most likely going to play significant snaps this year in JJ McCarthy. And say what you want, but that cannot be exciting for a receiver like Justin Jefferson. Now, money talks, and if you pay him a boatload of money, he's going to be happy and he's going to say all the right things. But don't you think that CD Lamb is on a better trajectory, I guess, this season and maybe even long term? If you assume that it's going to take a year or two for JJ McCarthy to kind of settle in, what's your take on these two guys moving forward?
He is Lamb is in the better situation, provided Dallas works everything out with Dak Prescott, which they probably will, but there are questions there. I think that if you're the Vikings, you might want to get Jefferson's deal done sooner than later, just to ensure that there's no holdout when you get to minicamp and you get to these, further along in the offseason, because he needs to get in there and start working with McCarthy or Sam Darnold, who may wind up being the starter for the first few weeks. You never know. But he's another new quarterback to the system. But they got to get on the same page. They got to get those reps down. OTAs are not valuable on the field as much for linemen, because obviously you're not playing real football, but they can be valuable for the quarterbacks and receivers as they start to work on their timing. So the longer that there's a holdout with a new quarterback, it's not a holdout, but an absence, then that you're putting yourself back in that regard.
I would say that, in my opinion, I think Justin Jefferson is a better receiver. I think he's more well-rounded. I mean, CD Lamb has a very unique skill set. He's very talented. These guys are both, if you want to call franchise wide receivers, like we always use franchise when talking about quarterbacks. I would take Justin Jefferson in terms of if I'm trying to pay a guy the most. Would you agree or disagree?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Justin Jefferson is a unique guy for his size, speed, but most of all, like his ball skills are phenomenal. And I'm not saying CD Lamb is not, but I don't think that you can find another Justin Jefferson, whereas a draft class may always contain a CD Lamb type guy. Right. Great route runner, good work ethic. I mean, just a well-rounded, excellent wide receiver. But is he a Hall of Fame type wide receiver? Justin Jefferson's a Hall of Fame type wide receiver.
All right. I know you love talking receivers. We're going to switch gears here and talk about the NFC, the National Football Conference. A recent article on the website, the 33rd Team, listed the Washington Commanders as the NFC team most likely to make the playoffs, who finished last season with a losing record. Other teams in the NFC with the losing record include Minnesota, Chicago, the Giants, Atlanta, Arizona, and Carolina. Which team from that group would you take as a team that goes from a losing record to making the postseason? Do you taking Washington? Or are you taking someone else?
That's an aggressive pick, because the Commanders were 4-13 last year, and they're going to have a rookie quarterback there. And that's not the toughest division in football, but still, you got to play Dallas and Philly 4 times. So I'm not taking the Commanders. I think the Vikings have are always a team that's in the mix. They were 7-10 last year. They're not that far away. I think that the quarterback is obviously a big question, but I really like the fit of McCarthy in Minnesota. I think he's really excellent for that system. I don't think there'll be any issue with Jefferson. They'll get him back. They've made some good moves to replace some of the talent that they lost. They're a team I feel the culture there is always strong, and they're always in the mix. They're always like kind of right there. And they just feel like a team where, hey, if maybe Green Bay backslides a little bit, or a couple of those other teams in the NFC don't play as well as they did last year, then Minnesota could slide in.
I'm going to go with Atlanta, because I think that Atlanta, they had a good roster last year, and they improved that roster by getting Kirk Cousins. Everyone wants to talk about the Michael Penix thing, which rightfully so. We talked about it here. But at the same time, I think that they're set up. And also, the one thing I looked at the most when I looked at this question was the division. Yeah. So some people might say, well, what about Chicago? Like they have an improved roster, but they also have a rookie quarterback. And that division's pretty tough when you look at Green Bay, Detroit, and you already mentioned the Minnesota Vikings being much improved. I think Atlanta in the NFC South has the best opportunity to go from losing record to making the playoffs. Not necessarily that they're going to win the division. I still like Tampa Bay and New Orleans as the front runners in the NFC South, but as a potential wild card team, I think Atlanta could be scary. I'm not saying scary good, but they could be much better than a lot of people are giving them credit for. I think Kirk Cousins is going to do a world of good for them. If there was another team, though, Coach, that you were to pick, you said Minnesota. Is there another one that you could see doing the same thing and going from losing record to making the playoffs?
If everything goes right, I guess you could make an argument for the Bears. They've certainly improved their roster. If Minnesota doesn't elevate in a way that I'm anticipating anyway, if Green Bay does backslide, then you could see Chicago kind of putting it all together. Their 11 personnel skill guys are going to be as good as anybody's in the NFL if Caleb Williams turns out to play like the number one overall pick. I mean, they've got Odunze at receiver and Moore and Keenan Allen and Cole Kmet at tight end and DeAndre Swift at running back. That's a great group of skill guys. And they've added some good pieces on defense. So you could argue for the Bears. I'm just not sold on the Bears being able to develop a quarterback right out of the gate, just because history says they haven't done so in over 30 years. And the other reason I like the Vikings real quick is when I look at teams that have a losing record and you say like, well, all right, well, how are they going to get better? How are they going to improve? Coaching is huge. Coaching is such a big difference in the culture of a franchise and being able to get a team from losing to winning, right? Being able to sort of find the solutions to the problems that created that losing record. That's on coaching. And I think Kevin O'Connell is the best coach in that group of teams with losing records. So I would put a lot on him. And again, that's another place where Chicago has been unsettled. They've gone through coach after coach after coach. So I'm just not sold on the Bears.
There's a lot of factors to consider when you're talking about this discussion, and you bring up the coach is a good point. I agree. Kevin O'Connell is probably the best of the bunch. Let's do the same thing on the AFC. So the AFC teams with the losing record last season were the Las Vegas Raiders, Denver Broncos, the New York Jets, Tennessee Titans, the Los Angeles Chargers, and the Patriots. Of that crop of teams, who do you think makes the postseason this year?
I hate that I'm going to say this because I'm so exhausted with Aaron Rodgers, but I think that the Jets have built a really good roster. Yeah. And much like talking about with Minnesota, like, hey, if Green Bay backslides a little bit, then Minnesota can maybe jump them. I mean, the same could happen with Buffalo, right? Buffalo has gutted a lot of their roster in a bit of a kind of rebuild on the fly here, at least financially anyway. The Jets seem to be pretty well positioned to take advantage of that. They're going to play 6 primetime games in the first 11 weeks, it's going to exhaust all of us. But Aaron Rodgers loves that stuff. We know he loves the spotlight. If he stays healthy, and that's the big caveat, if he stays healthy, you put him in prime time, you let him have his like one last Aaron Rodgers run, and I can see it happening with the Jets.
I agree with the Jets. If I was going to take another team, I would say, again, I'm looking at quarterbacks. So who has the best quarterback? I still think Justin Herbert is one of the best young quarterbacks in the league, and he's not really that young anymore as he's already on his second contract in the NFL. And I think that Harbaugh is going to do some wonders out there in LA in terms of getting that team focused. I mean, they went through Brandon Staley. Like that's going to lead to some PTSD, so to speak, with those players in terms of the blown leads and how they just mismanage game after game after game. I don't see Harbaugh making those mistakes. And so I think they definitely could be looking at a winning record in 2024. And what the heck, they could make the postseason as a wild card. It's going to take some time. They did lose some talent, but I thought they had a good offseason in terms of acquiring some players. They had a good draft. They got Joe Alt in the first round, should help that offensive line. What's your take on the Chargers? You think they have a chance?
Absolutely. I thought the draft was great. I think Harbaugh is going to remake them in the right way. I mean, giving Justin Herbert a great O-line and a run game will make him more effective. My only question about Harbaugh is this: his first time through in the NFL, his rah-rah act wore a little bit thin. He's a big gung-ho guy, and that works great on college kids. Is it going to work on professionals? And we'll see. Maybe he learned. Maybe he's kind of tamped it down a little bit. But those goofy stories about him in college, climbing trees with kids and camping out on people's lawns and those types of things. You're a 30-year-old NFL offensive lineman, and you're just like, come on, dude, that's a clown show. So like, that's not going to play. So we'll see how he goes about it.
He did get a team to the Super Bowl. They did not win the Super Bowl, but he did get a team to the Super Bowl. So he does have a track record of success in the National Football League. I think that's going to matter to a lot of these guys for sure. But I'll go with the Chargers. I just don't, when I look at the other teams that are listed here, the Raiders, again, Gardner Minshew is a good story. I like him as a player, but I just don't think he's that guy. And I don't think Aiden O'Connell is the guy either. When you look at New England, is it Jacoby Brissett? Is it May? Like, what's going on there? Tennessee, Will Levis, I'm assuming, is going to be the guy moving forward. None of that, or Denver is just, to me, their quarterback position is a dumpster fire when it pertains to the three players they have between Stidham, Bo Nix, and Zach Wilson, right? Isn't he there now?
Zach Wilson's there. Ben DiNucci. Don't forget Ben DiNucci, coach.
Oh, Ben's there too.
Yeah.
Is he from North Jersey? That sounds like a North Jersey name.
He might be. I don't know. It does sound like a North Jersey guy.
So we'll see how that shakes out in the AFC. Now let's switch gears a little bit. It is Memorial Day. It's coming off Memorial Day weekend. And we just passed the 20th anniversary of the death of Pat Tillman, who obviously played. Anyone that knows his story knows he played for the Arizona Cardinals. And then he left the NFL after 9/11 and joined the military and was killed over in Afghanistan, I believe. What do you make of Tillman's life and death? And is there any particular element of his story that is most striking to you?
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. For those who may not remember, I mean, Pat Tillman was a heck of a football player. He was a 7th round draft pick out of Arizona State who became a starter for the Cardinals. His last 2 seasons in the NFL, 2000, 2001, he had almost 250 combined tackles. He had 155 tackles in 2000. That still ranks in the top 20 for most tackles in a season in NFL history. And then he after just 4 years, he had a big contract. It's big at the time. It was about a $6 million contract extension on the table with the Cardinals. He turned it down to enlist after the 9/11 terrorist attacks and wound up getting killed over in Afghanistan. I mean, on one hand, I look at Pat Tillman and I think to myself that he's a true patriot. He's a true in a country right now where there's a lot of fake patriots. There's a lot of people, behind microphones saying tough things who, if they were actually called upon to do the tough things, wouldn't do them. There's too many of those people. He was the opposite. And there's something so admirable about that. And then on the other side of that, though, there's just he winds up being killed in an accident, essentially, by his own troops, quote unquote, friendly fire. The military seems to kind of cover it up at first, and then there's a big congressional investigation, and then they admit what happened, and so that's unfortunate. And then there's the bigger picture of the whole war in Afghanistan, that whole response to 9/11, which was very sort of vengeance oriented. And anybody who's old enough to remember 9/11 understands the want and almost need for revenge in the aftermath. So we go to Afghanistan and with this sort of like, vengeance in mind, and we run the Taliban out, but then there's not really any plan, and we're there forever. And when we walk away a couple of years back, the Taliban comes right back and is back in control. And you say to yourself, okay, so for what? What was the sacrifice for? Yeah. And those are tough questions, very tough questions. And it's a conflicting legacy of a complicated but incredibly admirable individual.
See, Pat Tillman, for those that may be listening to this that don't Maybe they didn't follow football at that time. Maybe they weren't alive at that time. Maybe they weren't cognizant at that time, whatever. The Arizona Cardinals were not a good team then. This isn't the Arizona Cardinals that made it to Super Bowl 43 and Larry Fitzgerald. Like they were a struggling team at that time. And Pat Tillman was not a well-known player either. I think you admit that, Coach. Like you said, 7th-round draft pick. He was a good player, but he wasn't a household name. He's a household name now. You just get the feeling the more you learn about him as an individual, everything that happened after his death would be the opposite of what he would want. This guy, like you said, he turned down a contract extension because he wanted to enlist. He didn't want fanfare. He didn't want anything extra. And you hear this from other people too, like Alejandro Villanueva, who's still alive, who played for the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens and had a great career at left tackle, who served prior to playing in the NFL. He doesn't want any extra attention for his service. They just wanted to serve their country. They felt it was their calling. They felt it was the best thing they could do. And so Pat Tillman goes over and he's serving his country. And like you said, he was killed in an accident. And then what does the government do? They kind of cover it up and they try to use it in a way to maybe shift a narrative or to run a narrative. And I hate that because, again, this guy who sacrificed his life and chose his country and to serve for his country over his own career, this is the last thing he would have wanted. He would not have wanted his name and his story to be used as a recruiting tactic or to be used in some type of narrative. People can say what they want about the Afghanistan war and the response to 9/11. When we're talking about Pat Tillman, it's a sad story for me. It's unbelievably patriotic, but it's also unbelievably sad based on the fact that the way that he was killed and then the aftermath afterwards, it was not fair. It was not fair for him, for a guy that just wanted to go out. He felt he was called to do what he did, and that is to serve his country. And for that to be kind of in this, have a cloud over top of it, I hate that. I've always hated that. So if you don't know anything about Pat Tillman, I encourage you to look up some information on your own, to do your own research on him, on his career in the NFL, on what happened with his when he was over in Afghanistan. Do your own research. Don't just listen to some snippet of someone on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram talking about it. Do your own research. But yeah, any final thoughts on Pat Tillman, Coach?
Well, it's summer's coming up, summer reading season for those who still read books. I don't know how many people are still reading books out there, but John Krakauer, phenomenal writer, did a book on this called Where Men Win Glory, which is a tremendous read. You blow through that book in a week. Krakauer does these great adventure stuff. He did Into Thin Air about an Everest expedition where some guys got jammed up near the top of Everest. He did Into the Wild, which is the story of Christopher McCandless, who went off to live in the Alaska wilderness for 40-some days and wound up dying out there. They made it into a pretty good movie. And his book on Pat Tillman's story is phenomenal. So that's a great one to check out.
I will have to check that. Say that name again of the book?
Where Men Win Glory.
Where Men Win Glory. All right, I will have to check that out because it's an interesting story. So, all right, it's tough to shift off of that story, but we're going to do that. We're both Steeler fans, and this is the last topic before we get to our player profile. The NFL announced last week that the city of Pittsburgh will host the 2026 NFL Draft. 2025 is in Green Bay, Wisconsin. 2026, it goes to the Steel City, the city of Pittsburgh. As a Steeler fan, what's your level of excitement for this on a scale from 1 to 10? 10 being it's through the roof, I'm ecstatic. 1 being it doesn't move the needle at all. Where do you stand, Coach?
Well, I mean, obviously my level of excitement for the draft in Pittsburgh and all that goes with that is a 10. I heard the other day that early estimates suggest that there could be upwards of 1 million fans that come to the draft over the 3 days. So logistically, as a resident of Southern New Jersey who will have to travel out to Pittsburgh for that draft, which I intend to do, that decreases my excitement level simply because of finding the hotel rooms and navigating the crowd. As I get older, I get crankier in terms of that kind of stuff. You want things to be easy and convenient, and they're oftentimes not. But for the city of Pittsburgh, phenomenal. What an economic boom, one. For the Pittsburgh Steelers franchise, same deal. You get to showcase the NFL. They're smart, man. You're going to Lambeau Field, iconic. One of the NFL's hallmark franchises, the Packers. Then the next year you're going to go to Pittsburgh, same deal, iconic franchise. The NFL really is doing a great job showcasing their some of their marquee teams. And just to have the opportunity to go to Pittsburgh will be fun for me. I love Pittsburgh. I mean, it's like a home away from home for me. Obviously, all the trips I've made out there to see the Steelers play and then out to training camp. And my kids even like it. 2 years ago, we went out to training camp and we stayed in the city for a while. We took them to Kennywood and we did, we went to a Pirates game and we walked all over the place, and they really liked the city, and they asked, hey, when can we go back? So I'm very excited from that standpoint. I would assume you are as well.
Yeah, I am, and growing up in Wheeling, West Virginia, which is only about 45 minutes away from Pittsburgh, we spent a lot of time in Pittsburgh and going to the old Three River Stadium. We watched a ton of Pirate games there, and that was back in the early 90s when the Pirates were really good. And I had Brian Batko of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on my Let's Ride podcast on Monday morning. And I asked him this question because I was curious what he thought. I don't know where they're going to put all these people. Like the North Shore, where Heinz Field is, or not, my apologies, Acrisure Stadium, yeah. Where it is located.
I didn't even react to that, by the way, when you said
I know.
I was like, yeah.
It doesn't have a lot of space. Like when you think about some of these other cities that have had a downtown area where they could just block off a bunch of streets and just, hey, flood it. That doesn't really have the infrastructure there on that North Shore for Pittsburgh. Right? People don't realize they've never been to the city. Pittsburgh has these huge rivers that it's a confluence right there at the Point Park. And it's going to be really difficult. I just can't fathom. Art Rooney II in a press conference said they're going to have it right near Stage AE, which is just outside of like the parking area for Acrisure Stadium and for PNC Park. So they do have two huge parking lots to utilize, but there's not a lot of room there. It's going to be interesting to see how they do this and how they maneuver things, but I'm excited. I plan on going. I think we're going to do some Steel Curtain Network, Fans First Sports Network stuff somewhere to do a lot, like a watch party for maybe people like us, over 40 that don't really want to go near a crowd, but we want to be close enough. So yeah, I'm excited. I would probably say I'm about a 9. I'm about a 9 on a scale from 1 to 10. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. For sure.
And you've been to one, so you have a different interpretation of it. See, I've never been to a draft, so you went to the one in Philly, so you can look at this. And I do want to share this, that I saw Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk. He was on the Dan Patrick show, and he said, the NFL's it's turned into this huge event. He said they lucked into this. I didn't know this story. They were intent on always being at Radio City Music Hall, but then there was an event that was conflicting. And so they had no choice but to move it. And that was the first time I think they moved it to Chicago. And then they saw how great it was. And then they moved it to Philadelphia and it got bigger. And then they moved it here and then Kansas City and now Detroit and then Green Bay. And so they literally lucked into this. Like it's literally, they just fell into this. So it's a money pit probably, but still it's cool. And the city of Pittsburgh deserves it. They're going to have a huge boom in their tourism, the revenue for restaurants, bars, hotels, like all of it's going to be awesome.
In Philly, they did it on the Benjamin Franklin Parkway, which for people who haven't been to Philadelphia, if you think about the movie Rocky, when Rocky runs up the steps of the art museum, there's a scene where he kind of turns around and he puts his arms up. Yeah. And you see this long shot of the Benjamin Franklin Parkway, which leads to the steps of the art museum. There's a circle right before you get there. And so it was they just blocked off the parkway, and fans were pushed all the way back down that parkway. You could have fit another 500,000 people there simply because of the design. So Philly had a natural spot, but the Benjamin Franklin Parkway is on the opposite side of town from the stadiums. So they moved it away from Lincoln Financial Field and Citizens Bank Park, where all the stadiums are, to fit it into their most iconic probably spot, the steps of the art museum. So they had a great spot. It'll be interesting, like you said, to see what Pittsburgh does as far as that goes.
Now, you don't need a fan doesn't need to have a ticket to go to the draft or anything. It's like a block party.
Yeah. It's like a big frat party, man. There's a lot of, and it is a party. It is a party. There are people in full party mode, man. They're getting after it. I'll put it that way.
Are there like vendors all over the place selling stuff, like places, or you just go to restaurants and bars near you? Like, how did they handle that?
I mean, in Philly, I don't know if they were legal or not, but there were a lot of like pop-up vendors. So I'll put it that way.
There you go. Cool. All right. Hey, that's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be exciting for everyone. And we'll be keeping you updated on all that good stuff as we get close to the 2026 draft. Still a long ways away. All right. Let's finish this up with our player profile. We were going to talk about this last week, but we pushed it back to this week. Tua. We want to talk about Tua down in Miami. What are they going to do with him? He's an interesting case study.
Yeah, that's the interesting question, because now that Jared Goff has gotten his big payday, $52 million a year. I still stumble over that when I say it. I'm like, what? 50 a year? $52 million a year? I just did a player profile on my Call Sheet podcast on Lawrence Taylor, arguably the greatest outside linebacker in NFL history, who wound up in a holdout situation that led to a contract extension that he got from the Giants in 1984 that paid him $1.1 million a year. For the greatest, that was, and he had to hold out to get that money. And I'm like, all right, $1 million a year for LT, $52 million a year for Jared Goff. And now the conversation is, well, Tua is probably next in line to get the big extension. And is he going to get more than Goff? And so now you're talking about Tua as your next $50+ million a year quarterback. And I think he's a really difficult guy to assess, simply because of the injury history and the scheme fit. Great scheme fit in Miami, in Mike McDaniel's system. The RPOs, the quick release, the timing routes. He's got an incredibly fast release, and he's really accurate with the ball. But he's also a guy who, the longer he holds the ball, the worse he is, and who struggles to make some full field reads. So would he be as good in a different system? What if Mike McDaniel gets fired in Miami or moves on or whatever? Is Tua the kind of guy you can just plug into any system? And other than last year where he stayed healthy, every year he's been shut down with one injury or another, and a couple of them have been head related, which is scary. So I don't know how that's going to be an interesting negotiation. Tua's agents are going to have to do a great job to get him a 50+ payday, which I think is what they expect.
When I think about these contracts, like, to me, there's got to be some type of, I don't know, reasonable isn't the right term, but there has to be someone somewhere that says, we got to take a stand and say, we're not going to pay this amount. When you talk about all the quarterbacks that have been paid handsomely, they've all done something in their career. So you look at Lamar Jackson, right? Lamar Jackson's a 2-time MVP. Now, he hasn't ever been to a Super Bowl, but he's been that type of quarterback. Joe Burrow has been to a Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes, I don't even need to go there. Jared Goff has been to a Super Bowl and has been to NFC championship games. The players that skew this a little bit are like your Deshaun Watsons, who got that monster contract. And I've always said the Browns are screwing the NFL again with this contract that they gave to a guy that has done nothing. So Tua, should he be paid? I think he should. Should he be paid as much as Jared Goff? No. Even Jared Goff, who is not considered, I don't think, by most people as an elite quarterback, he's still a good quarterback and can get teams to where they need to go. And that's to, Super Bowls. He's done it with the Rams. I don't know. Where do you put Tua in this tiered system of, he'll probably get paid handsomely, but I don't think he should get top dollar. Like, I don't think they set the market with Tua. Do you?
Yeah, you're right. Jared Goff, yes, he's gotten the Rams to the Super Bowl, and he's taken the Lions to the NFC Championship game.
Right.
You take the Lions to the NFC Championship game. That is noteworthy, right?
Yeah.
Has Tua won a playoff game? Did Miami win a playoff game last year, or did they just?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. Right, their first game was in Kansas City. I don't think he's even won a playoff game yet. So,
right.
I mean, you're right. Let's build a little bit of a resume. Great regular season quarterback, but injury history, no playoff resume to speak of. System guy. If you're the Dolphins, you have a lot to argue against him getting a massive contract. He's going to get paid. It's going to be generational money. We know that. But you're right. Who's going to take the stand? If you're the Dolphins, and I mean, what can you do though? See, this is the thing that gets tricky. Okay, you can pick up his 5th-year option. You can franchise him, but that's the end of your options. Then you got to let him walk. if you can't reach a deal,
Yeah.
are you going to let him walk? They don't want to let you get it. What you identify as a franchise quarterback, you lock him up. That just seems to be the norm.
I think the fact that we're having this discussion, and I would assume that Dolphins fans are having the same discussion, is your answer. If you're talking about, do we want to give this guy another contract? And if so, what is it going to look like? You're not sold on him as your franchise, because Justin Herbert hasn't won anything either. Like, I want to have full transparency. He hasn't won a thing. I don't think he's won a playoff game either. But the Chargers had zero hesitancy with giving him that next deal. They didn't hesitate at all. They wanted him paid. He got paid. Jalen Hurts has been to a Super Bowl. He got paid. So this is going to be an interesting dance to see how Tua postures himself with the Dolphins and how the Dolphins view him. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. So, all right, Coach, what's coming up on your call sheet this week?
Well, it's episode 58, Jeff.
Oh, well, that's
Do I need to say more?
Not with you. Not with you with your Cliff Harris is still a punk. There you go.
Yeah.
It's like,
so honestly, seriously, we're gonna for those who don't know, my favorite player of all time is Jack Lambert, number 58 for the Steelers. I'm gonna talk obviously about Jack Lambert, but I'm gonna talk bigger picture about heroes and the iconic figures in our lives, whether they're athletes or non-athletes, the people who help shape us. Because weirdly, Jack Lambert, a person I've never met, had a huge impact on my life. Not just in turning me into a Steelers fan, but helping me fall in love with the game of football, which has gone on to shape my life in so many ways, at my professionally, personally, etc. And so we're going to talk kind of big picture about the iconic figures in people's lives who do that for them.
That sounds great. When you think of Jack Lambert, what image comes to your mind?
The picture of him standing over Preston Pearson, fist clenched, and with Preston Pearson he's on the ground like turtled up on his back with the football. You know that photo?
I do. Yes, very much.
That's my immediate Jack Lambert image.
I always also it's not an image, but it's the video of when he always pump his legs before the snap. Like he just be driving his quick knees. All right, Coach. Very good as always. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. We'll be back next week for another NFL Whip Round. In the meantime, make sure you check out all of our NFL content right here on the FFSN NFL podcast feed and our YouTube channel. We like it. Subscribe to it. We appreciate it. Coach, as always, take it easy. Thank you very much.